All right, so people been asking, and I reckon I'm gonna try to do a video about specking cams, how we spec cams, some terminologies, some just generic information that I just see a whole bunch of people get wrong. And what I've done is, and this is not going to be an exhaustive down to the finite stuff video. This is just going to be an overview because there's just entirely too many variables. But one thing that I did in preparation, because I don't know how many people's asked, hey, do a video on how to spec cams, or, overlap, or how much is exhaust duration, split, all of those kind of topics. And while there are some answers to some of those questions, many of them are just so application dependent that it's hard to answer that question with a broad stroke answer and it be accurate. So I'm a lot of what we're going to talk about is theory, how it's applied, how we do it, why we do it. And because what I've done is there's 500 videos on the interweb of how to choose the right cam, how to spec a cam, how to get the right cam for your application, blah, 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 blah. And as cringe as it was, I made myself watch snippets of a bunch of those videos. And what I noticed pretty much in every one of them is they never actually told you anything. They just blabbered on with a bunch of nonsense and, this engine needs this cam. They didn't tell you why or how. You never actually seen any math. It was just all conjecture. And that was the theme in every single video that I seen. And the reason that those videos are like that is because the people making the video just don't know. I mean, they don't actually know. So they just use a bunch of keywords, trigger words, and maybe some graphics and some whiteboard stuff and some examples or some cam cards, and there's never really any actual data. It just is what it is. Now, I'm not going to give you, because there isn't one, I'm not going to give you a formula. This plus this equals this, and that's the cam you need, because one doesn't exist. And if anybody tells you that there is a formula, then, please share it and I'll show you it don't work. There are just so many variables that this application might need this deal and this other application might need this deal. And it's just too much stuff. But we're going to talk about some basic fundamentals. And the basic fundamentals do not change, regardless of what you're doing. The basic fundamentals are the basic fundamentals. And we're going to go over that stuff, and hopefully after this, you will have some kind of better understanding of why, when, and where, instead of, well, my 350 Chevrolet needs a 230 at 50 with a 106 lobe separation, and that's the answer every time, when it's not the answer every time. So stay tuned, and I'm going to scribble on the whiteboard because it seems like people like whiteboard scribbling. So we're going to do some whiteboard scribbling, and we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, and hopefully when we get done, all of us will be smarter than we was before we started. Stay tuned. All right, so here we go. Straight out of the gate, I want to just preface all of this and talk about lobes. So, we talk about at 50 duration. So, the way that I do it, some people do it different. That's cool. This ain't about other people. This is about how I do it. Something that I have learned as we go, right? A lot of other people on the interweb, they all know everything. But I learn new stuff, right? I don't know everything. So as I learn, it's okay to change what you previously thought, and it's okay for that stuff to be incorrect. So some people need to be right all the time. I just want to know what is right. If I was wrong before, that's cool. We got to be able to accept new information. So lots of things I thought were incorrect. And as I go, I try new stuff, apply new stuff, and we see it constantly make more power. Again, this is not a whatever, a kick at anybody or anything like that. I'm just saying that we see it on the interweb, right? You can see my stuff actually in practice making more power than it did last time. And that is the goal every time. That should be everybody's goal every time. So as I learn things, I try to share them with you, with my customers. We apply that to our products and we get better and do a better job and make a better cam or a better whatever it is we're making. We try to make a better one every time we make one. We want it to be better. So as I learn more and more about lobe design, how to apply it and what we can actually do in the engine, right? Because, we think this and then we try this and something else happens or it gets better or, hey, this is the way to do it. This is better, faster. And I think we're going to focus on, because it's a really good example, we're going to focus on Bob McVeigh's cam and the testing that they done. So, and if you hadn't seen that video, I will link it in the description. But Bob has a 427 pump gas, low compression. I mean, it's like 10 to 1 or something. Really low compression. It's got a set of Eric Weingartner's smaller version Dragon Slayers on it. And so they sent me all the data and we spec'd the cam, we designed the lobes, and we made the man a camshaft. We sent it in, and the cam that they had was very similar to the cam I spec'd, but I didn't know that at the time, right? I didn't have that information. They sent me the data, I spec'd the cam, shipped it to them, and then I found out that the cam they had was very, very, very close. So, once they put my cam in back to back, same day, within an hour, they pulled the cam that was in the motor out, put my cam in, and it made pretty much the whole curve up to close to peak. It was up 20 foot-pounds and like 15 horsepower, or maybe it was the other way around, 20 horsepower and 15 foot-pounds of torque. I don't remember exactly. But we were up like 2,000 RPM window. We were above what was there, right? So, and these are the specs for that camshaft. And all of this is at 50. And we're going to talk about why that's important. But this cam is 245, 261, 108 plus 3. And I think it was 400 lobe on the intake and 395 lobe on the exhaust, and that come up to like I should have done that math, 640 on the intake and 630 or 35 on the exhaust or something. The original cam they had was 248, 249. It was like two or 3 degrees difference. and the exhaust was 56 or 58. I don't remember. Gosh, I apologize. But that data is in the video. They go over both cam cards. So we had a few less degrees on the intake, a few more degrees on the exhaust, and was 1 degree tighter on the lobe separation, which don't matter. And so essentially, I should have looked at the overlap numbers on both cams, but I don't remember. But I think the overlap was super close, within a degree or two. And with all of that, you know, essentially there shouldn't have been much difference in the power curves because the profiles were so close, or the specs were so close. But what we seen was just the opposite of that. It was tremendously different. I mean, from the hit to 5,000 RPM, we was in a different zip code than the other cam. So that boils down to two things. So why did that happen? So again, we learn things, right? So as we go, we learn things. And as I'm learning more and more how to design cam lobes and manipulate acceleration curves and make the cam do what I want it to do, we have found ways to make the acceleration curve that is favorable to the system as far as I'm concerned. So and I'm going to take a snippet from Harvey Crane, who obviously founded Crane Cams. You know, he said that ultimately, I'm paraphrasing, he said, you know, after you have inspected and dissected about 2,000 camshafts, you have measured and studied the derivatives of about 2,000 camshafts, then we can have a intelligent conversation about cam lobes. So I took that advice, right? I have been looking at cam lobes for 9 years, and every single camshaft that comes in this building or out of this building, I looked at every derivative and tried to understand why, when, and where are they doing it this way. And what I have come to conclude out of all of that inspection is a whole lot of times, for reasons unknown to me, the absolute incorrect profile was used in this application. And that happens over and over and over again. It's crazy, the stuff I see. It's like, you know, I scratch my head and I'm like, why would you have that lobe in this engine? It makes absolutely no sense. I've seen it both ways. I've seen lobes entirely too fast, and I've seen lobes entirely too slow for that application. And, you know, it's either way, either side of the spectrum is a detriment to the system. If it's slow, I mean, it's friendly on parts, but depending on the application, you could be leaving power on the table, and not because of, well, you know, specifically the lobe design, but because you're not evacuating the cylinder or filling the cylinder as efficiently as you could because the lobe isn't moving fast enough. It isn't getting the valve out of the way so the system can do its job, right? So, and, you know, and this lobe stuff, it just tickles me to death because, you know, I just, every time, you know, about every, I don't know, every 10 or 15 lobes, I learn something new, and it's like, God, now I can apply that new nugget to my system. And we started making families, and if you ain't seen the lobe catalog video and all that, we'll probably link that in the description too. But we're doing a new lobe catalog, and I'm working on a bunch of new families, and we've got most of the families started. But then I learn a new trick, and then it's like, God, I got 5 lobes designed for that family. I need to go back and redesign all 5 of those and add these other ones to it that we just, you know. So now I've come up with a way that all of the design parameters for each family. I built basically like a spreadsheet, so I have all of that data logged. So when I go back to make another lobe for that family, we have all of that data in place. That way, each family is going to have the same open and closing derivatives. It's going to have the same peak acceleration. It'll have the same hydraulic intensity or major intensity, depending on if it's hydraulic or solid. So that way, whether you get, I'm spitballing, whether you get a 220 at 50 or a 245 at 50, both of those lobes are going to have if the number is 53 on hydraulic intensity, both lobes will have a 53 hydraulic intensity. Both lobes will have a whatever, 3 zeros and a 3 positive acceleration, and they'll both have the same velocity and acceleration at 4 at the pickup point, right? And so that is the goal, is we want, to have uniformity in a family. And then, some of the, kind of getting back to Bob's deal, when we talk about, because he's a 427, so to make that work, we got to have a 1-inch base circle with a 400 lobe. So when you get down to 1-inch base circles, 900 base circles, all of that's fine. Like, it's not a problem. But what is a problem is you become, we've talked about this before, you become acceleration limited because of the base circle, right? You can go back and watch the video about inverse radiuses, and we talk about that a lot and explain what's going on. But when the base circle is small, you can only run X amount of positive acceleration. You just can't go any faster. There's just not enough room to make that happen, right? So what we have figured out is a way, a shape to the acceleration curve that will allow us to run a little more acceleration without the lobe going inverse radius. So we done that on the original cam. Since then, I have maybe not perfected, but I have tweaked that math and got a little more acceleration out of it, even in that same base circle. So just to test, because we love testing stuff, because anybody can get on the internet and say, well, my stuff is better than Bob's stuff, right? But if they can't actually show you a ABA test, then they're just talking, right? It's just talk. And that's why we test, and that's why we put videos out. That's why we share our customers' videos when they're doing good or sometimes bad. I mean, we share it all. Like I try to be an open book, right? I'm not scared to say, hey, that didn't work out, or hey, this is why that didn't work out. And we're going to fix it, right? That's just how we do things. So, and that's how we learn, right? If you're always, if you only ever show the good stuff and you don't ever address the bad stuff, you're just fooling yourself. So we don't always hit it. It don't always happen, but if we don't hit it, then we try to take the data, if we can get data, right? We take the data, we figure out where we missed it, we adjust it and correct it. And that's how you move forward in this deal, right? So I redesigned these lobes. The 50s are the same, lift's the same, lobe separation, intake center line, all of that stuff's the same. But we was able to get a little more positive acceleration, and I'm interested to see just how much power, if any, is that going to give us. And so I asked Bob, I said, hey, if I do another cam, can we back-to-back test the old cam versus the new cam same day? He said, absolutely. So what we're going to do is that, plus he said, hey, I would love for it to peak a little further up. So can we do another cam and see if we can get the RPM up? Absolutely. So I have spec'd another cam to try to move the RPM up. You know, probably I think it peaked at like 62-ish, and he wants to peak around 65, 66. So I done another cam. I feel confident that it's gonna go another 400 or 500 RPM, and that's where he wants to be. It would ideally, he needs a little more head. He doesn't quite have enough cylinder head to do what the motor's capable of, and we're going to talk about that because that's a big deal, and we're going to talk about that too. But I want to finish up this lobe stuff, and then we're going to move into some more areas of this situation. So you will get to see, and I will get to see, all of us at the same time, what the acceleration is going to do to the horsepower and the torque. And I feel confident that we're going to see, because we're going to do the exact same cam. And then we're going to do a new version that is the updated acceleration curve, like the original spec, but with an updated acceleration curve that's a little larger with the events, you know, tweaked around a little bit to hopefully put them in the most ideal place, plus some more duration to carry us another 400 or 500. And it might fool me, it might go a little further than that, but I expect about 400 or 500 more RPM to peak. You know, we expect it to carry a little beyond that, right? I mean, most of the time, unless you're just absolutely out of cylinder head, it'll carry for another 300 or 400 or 500 RPM. And I mean, I've seen some stuff with lots of cylinder head, it'll carry another 600, 800 RPM. You know, it's all airflow dependent. You know, how long can it maintain? So that's that. And another thing that I want to say is, again, I think that this number is really important. And the way for me, again, everybody else do whatever they want to. For me, this is the number. And then to figure out the advertised number, to me, that is application specific, in that the valve train, the engine, the RPM demands are gonna dictate how far away this number is from advertised, right? If it's lower RPM, lightweight valve train, this number to advertised is gonna get closer and closer and closer, right? So where we might have on just a run-of-the-mill basic system, we might have 54, 55 hydraulic intensity. Something that is a lower RPM, maybe, you know, kind of like Bob's deal, 6,000, 6,500. That's relatively a low RPM. And he got shaft rockers, and if he's got a nice stiff push rod, 11/32, 3/8, something like that, and the valve springs are applicable, titanium retainers, that kind of stuff, we could probably squeeze that hydraulic intensity down to 52, 53, give or take. It was real hard before to get that small with a small base circle for me, because I couldn't get it to not go inverse radius. But when I learned how to tweak the acceleration curve, I have found that now I can pull it down, pull that hydraulic intensity down, and be able to get all the numbers to do what I want them to. And so we can probably, and I don't remember, I should have pulled them up. I don't remember the new lobes that are like these that I put some more acceleration in. I need to look at them again. I don't remember what the hydraulic intensity, I think it was like 53 or 54. So it wasn't crazy, but I might, that's probably realistic. About 53 is probably about as tight as we're gonna get, just because of the lobe design, the base circle. But if it wasn't for the base circle, you know, we could probably get away in that application, minus the base circle problem. 52 would probably be realistic. But we'll see where that comes out at. And you know, again, it might be after the testing, before the I don't know. But when we get all of that stuff sort it out, I will do a video about all those lobe designs and all the data, and we'll go over some of that stuff. Because one issue, here's the issue with the lobe designs, and I think we're going to quit on that and move on to something else. But what we talk about, and I've done some chicken scratch drawings here. So we've got, red is the lift curve. This is exhaust lobe, intake lobe. The green line is the acceleration curve, and this green line is the jerk curve. So what happens is, so you have a, let me mark here. So somewhere, say this is a hydraulic, right? So somewhere along in here is 4/1000ths lift. So that's where the system starts. That's where we're gonna say advertised, well, we use 6, but at the cam, on all the data we use 6, but when we're designing lobes, we set all of our data at 4/1000ths tappet lift. So say from 4 to peak acceleration. So, as you shorten this up, that angle gets greater and greater and greater. So if you make the hydraulic intensity less and less and less, this angle gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And then conversely, on this side, the angle of the decel of the acceleration curve, which ends up being negative jerk, because jerk is the rate of change of acceleration, that's where the valve train gets in trouble, right? So the lifter is coming up, we're coming up the lobe, and we're in tension all the way to here. So at peak acceleration, the lifter and the whole rest of the valve train is in tension. When we get to peak acceleration, the system starts unloading itself. So as it comes down to negative acceleration, and peak jerk is going to happen somewhere around here. And that's usually on a hydraulic, somewhere around 160-ish lift, give or take 20 either way, depending on the lobe design. On a solid with a lot of lift, that's going to happen right around 200 lift. So that is where it's going to, for lack of a better word, crap the bed. And then so if it goes out of control here, right, that's going to be about right here, then that's where we get all of this funky stuff going on, and we get loft over the nose, and then it crashes in on the closing side and just, scrambles the whole system. And so that's why you can't go but just as fast as you can go for the system you have. There is no, just like how much duration you need, or how much this or that or the other thing you need for your deal. There is no one size fits all answer for this. It just don't exist, right? So that's why it's so important, Jim Bob calls XYZ company or get some guru on the internet to spec him a cam, and all of the right questions wasn't asked, and they wasn't applied to the system. So we end up with lobes that are incorrect for the application. You're just beating up the valve train, super noisy valve train, or you're potentially leaving horsepower on the table. So all of those things are why getting this stuff right is like really important to me anyway. Some people just, flick a lobe catalog open and just, them's the ones we want. And even though some lobe catalogs have descriptions, you still don't get any derivatives. And then even if you did get derivatives, most people wouldn't know what to do with them. So I hope when we finish our catalog, we're going to try to give you some derivatives and help you understand how they work and why. Because I think that's a lot of places just hold that information hostage and don't share it on purpose, because they're scared. I don't know what they're scared of, but I don't care. I'll just tell you, it don't make a difference to me. And if you can do a better job than me, then I'll pay attention to what you're doing, and we'll all get better, right? That's the goal. So anyway, all right. that's the lobe stuff. So we done with that. We've addressed it. So let's move on to, let's talk about cylinder heads right quick. So here's the deal. Everybody is scared to death to have too much cylinder head. We had a guy not too long ago, he wanted the cam and some heads. And he had a 350, just a straight cruiser, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I told him, I said, yeah, our 200cc aluminum head will be perfect, you know. And he's like, oh man, that head's too big. And I'm like, well, why is it too big? Well, my engine builder said it's too big. And I'm like, but why is it too big? Well, it won't have no bottom end torque. Have you got any proof of that? I mean, can you show me any dyno results? Well, no, my engine builder says so. So again, this idea of just cause somebody says something doesn't make it factual, right? So the problem with cylinder heads is, one, the peak flow number doesn't actually mean anything really. But if you have a properly designed cylinder head, the peak number or the number at the maximum lift you're gonna use, that's the number we use. You know, if you can't use more than 700 lift, then 700 lift flow number is the number we're gonna use to calculate. If you got a straight car and it's 600 lift, that's the number we're gonna use, 600. I don't care if the head flows to 1.5 inches. If you can't open the valve but to 600, whatever that flow number is, that is the number we're gonna use. So, for instance, so Bob's deal, and again, I should have this information in front of me. Bob's deal, I think the head flows a little over 300. I can't remember exactly, but 315, 317, something like that. If Bob had 20 more CFM, he could do the exact same job he's doing now with probably 10 or 12 degrees less duration. It would make the exact same power. The curve would look identical, and you could do it with 12 degrees less. That is the beauty in a lot of applications where, and we see this all the time, especially with big blocks or anything that's big cubic inches. People buy a cylinder head that would be a really good head for a small block Chevrolet and put it on a big block Chevrolet. And then, so then when we go to spec a cam, you know, there are some formulas that we have developed through people smarter than me that allow us to take the cubic inches and the RPM. So let me back up. You have a demand. The cubic inches and the RPM are the demand, right? You have a supply. The supply is the cylinder head. The camshaft is the switch that turns the cylinder head on and off. So the formula goes like this. Inches plus demand equals we need X amount of flow. If we have less than X amount of flow, then we need to add duration because we need to keep the valve open longer to do the job. So I think most of the formulas work around that we've developed through other people that are smarter than me. You know, like 240 degrees at 50 is the goal, right? So we need this much cylinder head at 240 degrees to do the job. And then if we have less cylinder head, degrees go up. If we have more cylinder head, degrees go down. Now, the problem with that scale is it's not scalable either way. It's scalable about 30 degrees either direction, and it works really good. When we get out of that, it's so bad that it's just not usable because, and this is why I say, man, there's all kind of formulas. There's all kind of stuff out there that works okay, but nothing is perfect. I mean, if the math says we need 325 degrees of duration because you are way under cylinder headed for your application, we can't just put a 325 degree cam in your motor. it's not going to work, right? You need to fix the cylinder head. And that's just how it is. So I tell people all the time, you are way better off to have more cylinder head and less cam than less cylinder head and more cam. When you put more cam in the motor, you're just going to knock the torque out of it. The averages will be down. You might make a bigger peak number. But here's something else that I see a lot of people focus on. They just, oh man, it made 5 more horsepower or 10 more horsepower, but it was down 20 on averages. And the problem is peak horsepower has never won a race ever in the whole history of mankind. Average horsepower and torque wins races, period. So if you're focusing on peak, you're just out to lunch, because peak means zero. It just doesn't mean anything. Look at the averages, figure out what your RPM window is, right? I mean, if you drag race, you know that we're going to leave at $5,000 or 4,500 on the converter, and we're going to shift at whatever peak torque is. I mean, whatever peak, close to peak power somewhere in that window, and whatever that window is, set the averages on the dyno to that window and look at the averages as you're making changes, corrections, tuning. Look at that window and try to make the averages as high as they possibly can be. I don't even pay any attention to peak numbers. It's irrelevant to me because it's just useless information. So, but so many of these people, we've had it multiple times in the last week. A lot of this drag and drive stuff. People got 427 small block Chevrolets and they got a 290 or a 300 CFM cylinder head. And I'm just like, man, you're killing yourself. If you'd have bought this part number head, you would be way ahead of the game than this head. And so we've had a couple of people like, man, I need to back up and punch, see if I can send these heads back and get the right head. And, a 427 small block Chevrolet that's going to go 7,000 RPM, it needs about, to do a really good job and have a camshaft that's on the smaller side, so all the averages are big, torque's big, you need roughly about 330, 335 CFM. That's a lot of CFM. That's a lot of cylinder head. So it's probably going to be hard to get there and keep the CCs down, and so it ain't just, we got coefficient of discharge. That's a whole nother topic. But in a good conventional cylinder head, you can get to, without too much trouble, and keep the CC small. You can get to, mid to upper 320s without too much trouble. So you take a 427 with a 325 CFM head. That package to go 7,000 RPM might need a 255-ish, 258 at 50 cam on the intake. It might need that much duration. You take that same motor and pull 25 CFM out of that cylinder head, and now that same motor is gonna need, to go to 7,000, it's gonna need 18, 19 more degrees of duration to do the same job. So then you'll see that down low, the torque's gonna be off down low just because the cam is so much bigger. And then, so that's the parameters for intake duration. So that's exactly what we done for Bob. So we took his cubic inches, we took his RPM, and we took his available cylinder head flow. And we crunched a bunch of numbers, and we concluded that to hit, and I'm pretty sure, I got it wrote down, but I'm almost positive he told me that, he was going to go to about 6,000. He wanted to shift around 6,000. And usually, depending on cylinder head, they'll carry 300 or 400 RPM. I think his carried another 250. So, it was on the lower end, but again, he's out of cylinder head. So the math yielded 245 degrees, right? So how do you figure out everything else? So we looked at the exhaust flow, and there is some validation to 80% and 70% and all that. And we got a little chart, little sliding scale spreadsheet that, You know, if it's the percentage is here, then we'll put this much split. If the percentage is here, this much split. But more than that, I find that if it's going to have a full exhaust, or if it's going to have mufflers, or it's going to have just open headers, plus the header size, plus the exhaust port flow. And this, again, this is why I say there is no one formula fits all. You have got to have experience. You just, maybe somebody can do it, but I can't do it without experience. I do this stuff, I get feedback, I make notes, and the spreadsheets and the math work as a general rule of thumb. But as far as we can just check boxes and move on, it just don't work that way that I have found. So after we crunched the numbers and some other stuff we looked at, and the exhaust flow, and we knew it was going to be in a car with full exhaust, we determined that it needed about 16 degrees, give or take, of overlap, of split in it. And so the exhaust has just a little less lift, 5 thousandths, than the intake at the lobe. And generally speaking, when you spread the duration out at the same lift, it brings the acceleration down. Now we can tweak that some, but generally speaking, we slow the exhaust lobe down because of expanding exhaust gases. As you know, the piston is coming down, like we're on the power stroke. The gases are expanding, pushing the piston down. So if you just whack the exhaust valve open, the exhaust valve is opening at 61.5 degrees before bottom dead center. So if you just whack the valve open, it's going to knock all the pressure out of the cylinder. So you just rob the power stroke. So you've got to be careful. We want to open this valve, we want to open as early as humanly possible without murdering the power stroke. Why do we want to do that? The reason that this needs to get open is pumping losses. So the piston is coming down on the power stroke, right? The gases are expanding and it's pushing the piston down. It's doing work, right? It's putting that into the crankshaft, the transmission, the rear end, to the tire, on and on and on. The problem is everything after bottom dead center, so the piston gets all the way to bottom dead center, and now the engine has to work to bring it back up. And as it comes up, it's pushing the remaining exhaust gas out the system, right? So that takes a lot of work. And not only does it take a lot of work, we call that pumping losses. So we need to get the cylinder evacuated, the whole cylinder evacuated, so it's clean and ready for the intake charge to come in. The issue is anything that we do before bottom dead center is free. That's free work. So the earlier we can open the exhaust valve, then we negate as much pumping losses as humanly possible. So we try to keep making that event earlier and earlier and earlier till we start losing power. And ideally, if a man had plenty of money and time, then we would find a cam that works good, and then we would just start moving this number earlier. No other number would change. That's why this right here is nonsense. It don't mean anything. We would just keep moving this number earlier and earlier till it started losing power. Then, in my opinion, we would start moving this number right here till it started losing power. And then once we got these two right, then we could go back and start working on these two. And then you could dial it in to absolute perfection. Because again, events are all that will ever matter. No other number amounts to anything. Events matter. If we get done tweaking all these numbers, this stuff right here might look like nothing you ever seen. But it doesn't matter because every engine, the way the cylinder head acts, the way the exhaust system is, the way the intake, I mean, you've got all of these tuned pulses, you got waves, there's so much stuff going on. There's some smart people that can probably calculate all that stuff up. I just had never met them. So till then we just do it this way, and this is how we do it. And this is, again, this is the point, but to me, this event right here and this event right here are the most two important events in the whole engine. You know, this one matters and these matter, all of that, but these two, if you get these two right, that's the start of a really good system, in my opinion. So, you know, we talked about what this does, right? Well, let's talk about what this one does. So with the intake valve closing, a couple of things. So one, it's obviously going to, at low RPM, we're going to trap more in the cylinder because this is happening as the piston's coming up. So this happens before TDC. So the piston's coming up and it's trying to push the whatever's in the cylinder back into the intake. That's a problem at low RPM. And that's why this is a problem at low RPM. This is a problem at low RPM. So you'll notice most of the time, not always, but most of the time, low RPM torque type cams are going to have an early intake valve closing, and they're going to have a earlier exhaust valve opening, because at low RPM, that's when we get into trouble with those events. And so as RPM increases, and we're going to see an example, as RPM increases, those events become less and less critical just because of engine speed. You've got engine speed and you've got the speed of the air, especially on the intake. Even though the piston's coming up, there's so much air coming in, the speed of the air just overpowers the piston, so you can have more cylinder filling while the piston's coming up as RPM increases. So you'll see this number right here on race stuff, you know, higher RPM race stuff. I mean, this number right here will be 60, 70, 80. This number right here, it'll be the same way. 70, 80, 100, depending on RPM, because the further the RPM goes up, there's less time. So you've got to start this stuff and close this stuff later and earlier. It's just how the system works. And so again, this is why, you know, experience with this stuff is really critical, because you just got to know where the window is. And even though you know where the window is, that don't mean you're going to hit it, right? You might be on the wrong end of the scale and need to tweak or tune or whatever you got to do to get there. But so let me put on the board here the new specs that we're going to do for Bob, and then we'll go over why that's different and what's going on, you know, and all that stuff. All right, so Uncle Bob's new cam is going to be 250, 266, 109 plus 5. So why did we choose those numbers? So we need to go a little more RPM. So generally, a slightly later exhaust valve closing helps with that issue. And then because of more RPM, we need to open the exhaust valve a little sooner so we can start evacuating the cylinder a little faster, because the faster you go, the harder it is for pumping losses, because there's just less time to move the gases in and out of the system. And conversely, generally speaking, and again, it's just application relative, but a little more overlap is friendly for more RPM also. So I think, let me get the numbers in front of me so I don't tell you a lie. All right, so this was 47 and a half. this was 17 and a half, this was 61 and a half, and this was 19 and a half. So the exhaust valve closing is relatively in the same place, but you know, a few degrees here, a few degrees here, and several degrees here. So I prioritized this number, and because it's a really low compression deal, and again, this is one of them, you know, one size does not fit all. Because it's really low compression, we need to prioritize this more than we would if it was not a low compression deal. So we don't want this to get too, people talk about, let's just touch on this right quick because this is getting long and I apologize, but again, so many people's asked, so here it is. You can watch it in several episodes if you need to, or settings, I guess you'd say. People like calculate dynamic compression and this, you know, I got this dynamic compression or I got that dynamic compression. The problem with dynamic compression is you don't know the answer. And, you know, like, well, I got a calculator. Well, no, you don't. The problem with dynamic compression is volumetric efficiency is not in the calculation. Why does that matter? Volumetric efficiency is going to determine how much the cylinder feels, regardless of your dynamic calculation. It doesn't mean anything because here is a scenario, right? Here's a scenario. You got two engines. One engine has a 8.5 dynamic calculation, calculated with an online calculator. One has 8.5. The other engine has 7.5. The 8.5 engine has 100% volumetric efficiency. The 7.5 has 115% volumetric efficiency. So which one has higher dynamic? Right? So that's the problem, is we can't calculate really, some people say they can, but I haven't seen it play out in real life, but it's hard to calculate volumetric efficiency without the motor ever running. Just on paper, it's just, you just about can't calculate it. So I don't get too broke down on dynamic. It's something good to look at. It's a basic tool that, yeah, I mean, you know, but I see varied results. I mean, I see stuff that shouldn't have a problem that does have a problem, and stuff that should have a problem that don't have a problem. So again, I think it's a good basic rule to kind of, but I don't let it dictate my life, right? This number needs to be whatever it needs to be within reason, and I'm not going to compromise this way off in fantasy land just to hit some target number that doesn't actually do what we think it does. So that's kind of that deal. And, you know, maybe overlap is super subjective. I mean, there's so many variables. Some cylinder heads have a lot of cross flow. You got to be careful with overlap. Some cylinder heads don't have a lot of cross flow. Overlap's not quite as important. It can help, you know, with scavenging and cylinder filling. A lot of this number is directly correlated to header tuning. I've talked about header tuning in other videos. I don't have a timing light for headers. Some people, you know, can calculate a lot of stuff. I'm not that guy. I just know that if the header is right, this is key. If the header is not right, this is not such a big deal in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, I don't get crazy about it. Again, these two numbers right here are king, and after that, you know, this is kind of important. All of these, somebody asked in the comments on something else, I don't remember, might have been on Facebook. All of these numbers, all of them, are in crankshaft degrees except that number. That number right there is in camshaft degrees because this is an output. This is an output of these numbers. This is only applicable over there in my grinder. At no other time is that number applicable to me. Other people might use it, but to me, the only time we use this number is in the grinder. So these numbers right here, I pick this number first, and then after this number, then I start this stuff. And then through, again, you know, we talked about it, but I was just trying to hit the high spots before we hem this up. You know, from experience, exhaust flow, exhaust system type, we're going to figure out how much bigger this number needs to be than that number. Once we have that figured out, then we can turn this data into this data. And once we have this data, we can get this data. Because this number without the intake center line is almost useless. You can move the intake center line, obviously, but if we want the intake center line to be at X, then we need to know where the exhaust center line is to come up with this number so I can grind it, right? So that's why, you know, if you minus this number from this number, that's the intake center line. If you add this number to this number, that's the exhaust center line. I mean, I think that summarizes what we do and why we do it. And I hope that, you know, the takeaway is you can do a lot with a lower RPM package is not as critical on lobe design as a higher RPM package. Low RPM stuff needs to focus more on, you know, because you just have a lot of time for it to escape. So, you know, this and this needs to be shorter, earlier happening. And, you know, overlap, you know, we may have a whole nother discussion on that, but higher RPM stuff, I mean, this number's got to get later, this number's got to get earlier, and it just is how it is. So, you know, and then obviously, for the most part, this number needs to get a little bigger, and this number needs to get a little bigger. And it depends on the package, but pretty much everything we do now, the split, because this was a specific question, the split between the intake and exhaust, I almost don't do anything less than 6 degrees of split. And we've got some like Comp Eliminator and Super Pro type big block stuff. Man, we're running, a lot of them's on alcohol, methanol, whatever you want to call it. And the gas is just thick and heavy, and it takes a lot of extra work to get it out. So a lot of those motors, we're running, man, 25 degrees of split. Nitrous is like that. Nitrous is heavy. We're running tons and tons of split in the exhaust to make that work out. Because again, we got to make this number early enough, and we might not want to move this number because this number and this number give you this number. And so the problem, I mean, if you say, and here's how you calculate overlap, right? If you want to know what this number is, add this number to this number, and you got this number. So, but you know, with a lot of applications, we can't just keep making this number bigger because we're going to bleed the system. So we might want to leave this number alone and make this number bigger. So this gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's all on this side of the lobe. So then this has to move for us to do that. And again, you know, the calculation gives us what this is when we put it in the grinder. So, but again, that's how, you know, but because those gases are heavy, we got to give it extra time. So we got to open it earlier. Another thing quickly, because this has just got way too long, I apologize. Another problem that I see nobody talk about is how much bigger do you make this number and this number for spring pressure, deflection, and RPM. The bigger the RPM gets, the more spring pressure, and the less rigid the push rod is, this number's got to grow. So luckily, I'm friends with a lot of smart people, and a good buddy of mine, Ben Schrader at EFI University, he actually has a chart from observation on the Spintron, he has a chart that he was nice enough to share with me that has pushrod diameter, pressure, and RPM for deflection. And it's like a sliding scale. So we can determine how much bigger we need to make. So there's calculated duration, right? It needs this much duration, but it actually needs this many more degrees because of deflection. So most of the time, whatever the math says, if the math says 245, we're going to actually grind a 249, a 250, a 252. It just depends on the application, the RPM, the spring pressure. The more spring pressure, the bigger we got to make it because the system is deflecting. And I didn't realize till I seen the Spintron data, I just didn't realize how much the system is deflecting, even with monstrous push rods. We did a test with a buddy of mine, and they went from 3/8 to double taper 7/16 thick wall on a big inch big block that we done a cam in 500 lobe lift, and that thing picked up like 40 horsepower just changing the push rod. And again, that's because the push rod was deflecting that much. And so that 285 degrees of duration camshaft was probably about 260 instead of 285 because the push rod was just absorbing all the duration because it just, it just couldn't handle the system. So that's another consideration. In the street stuff ain't so bad, hydraulic, low pressure, but when you get into race stuff, some applications you just can't get enough push rod in the motor. It won't fit through the head. It just won't fit. So in those applications, you have to be really aware, a softer lobe and a smaller spring package with titanium everything may be more ideal because of system flex, and you just can't help it. So you just need to be aware of that kind of stuff too, because that is a big deal when you get into that world. It's just, but still, most of the time, my cams are smaller than everybody else's. People tell me all the time, man, that cam's way smaller than everybody else said. And, and it just, the math is the math. And so I try to do it with the system we've been using. And, 90% of the time it works out great. And the other 10% of the time we just have anomalies that we can't account for, or, some data wasn't accurate, or, they done did a valve job that knocked, 20 horsepower out of the head, and that's why we need more cam. And so there's just a lot of variables. So, I just hope that helps you make sense out of all of this and what's going on, and separate, the snake oil from what's actually real. So anyway, I'm gonna quit. Comments, thoughts, more stuff you want to unpack. Can I make it more clear? Because like I say, I just don't think there's an application specific, this is what it is. And I just don't think that's realistic. So my recommendation is, whoever your cam guy is, even if he's not a guru, he's got more experience than you do. So let him help you get a cam that will do what you need to do. Because I'd rather have plenty of experience than just guess or just take some advice from somebody off the internet that you don't actually know if they actually know anything or not, So hopefully that helps. Thank y'all so much. Sorry for rambling on, but it's just a lot of stuff that just takes a minute to get it unpacked. So hopefully it helped. Thank you. See you on the next one. Check out the website, powellmachininc.com. Y'all have a great evening.